Hey everybody, my name is Adam. In this video today, we're going to be talking about the color wheel in a bit more depth than when we've talked about it previously in either workshops or short tutorials. So this workshop is going to be part of a series of like a little bit longer tutorials than I've done in the past. I've been getting a lot of good feedback in regards to these sort of slightly longer tutorials that run anywhere from like 15 to 25 minutes. So that's what this one's going to be today. Much shorter than our workshops, but still very in depth. Enjoy.
The color wheel is a tool that you can find in both edit mode and develop mode. We're going to be talking about it primarily in edit mode today, but I just want to show you where it is in develop mode so you know that. So I have an image here that I'm going to be working with. I'm going to go to develop mode, and you'll notice that color wheel I think should be fifth from the top right here. So that's color wheel in develop mode. As for edit mode, let's pop over to edit mode. You'll notice that it will be a part of the color pane on the filter menu here. So just to ease of use, if I collapse all these, I'll show you where it is. It's just within the color filter, just right here, color wheel. So I'm going to click on that, and we'll talk about our image here and the challenges within our image. So our image that we have here has a bit of a tint adjustment, or there's been some sort of tinting that happens in our image, because you'll notice that a good portion of our image has this sort of rouge kind of purple look to it, which means to say that when someone's adjusting for color correction, right, when they're going in and they're editing the warmth of their image, they might have adjusted the tint slightly. And in the case of our image, it's actually quite nice. It gives it this like warmth to our image that's lovely. We don't want to really interrupt or interact with that in our image, but we do want to say make a couple changes to this image. And one of those changes would be to, let's, as an experiment, completely change that hue of our umbrella here. And if we do so, how do we do so without disrupting other reds in our image? And in this case, where our image has a lot of these kind of blue-red tones in that of purple, we could do a lot of damage to our image unless we're specifically focusing in on one color. Hence the reason why we're using the color wheel in this case. So all the color wheel is it's a method of selecting specific hues. And then it does a good job of specifying the range of saturation that you're going to be selecting and making adjustments to. When we're looking at the color wheel itself, the wheel is just for selecting the color. It doesn't actually make any adjustments to the color itself. The adjustments take place underneath the color wheel. So where we see smoothness, saturation, hue, brightness, contrast, etc., these adjustments correspond to whatever color we've selected. When we go into our image here, and the change that we're going to be making, again, is to change this red here, right, this umbrella, we need to select that red. So we can actually click directly on our image, and if you watch this, you'll notice that as I hover over my image, there's this little ball on the color wheel that moves. And what that ball is showcasing to us is that we can actually use the color picker itself to move the orientation of the color wheel. So if I click over this blue in this, it looks like a building here, it'll move the color wheel so that I'm selecting that blue. If I move over to this umbrella here, it will select the umbrella, and you'll see that the color wheel will adjust to red because that is the color that's comprised of this umbrella here. So you can use the color picker to sort of move about your image, which is a really cool and beneficial way to select individual colors in your image. And from there, we can refine. So just to illustrate, we also don't need to use the eyedropper. We can actually just use the color wheel's center point itself, this sort of central radial marking, and we can draw that around the color wheel. And as you can see, as I do so, what's going to pop up is it's going to highlight parts of our image that contain that color. So when I'm interacting with red, you'll see that parts of my image that are red show up in our image, and they are an intensity of red based on their saturation. And then if I slowly work it around, you can see, okay, well, these are these sort of maroon parts of my image, right, in between red and pink. And if I move it even further into purple, you can see that what I was saying earlier about this tint, right, that appears in the background, well, you can see that that's a good portion of my image. If I move it into blue, you'll see that the blue places will be highlighted. Again, all of this highlighting overlay that we see here, all this is to do is to show us parts of our image that will be affected by these adjustments. If we were to take these left and right paddles that exist on our color wheel here within the center point, what we can do is we can actually add additional spectrums. So if I want to, say, for example, target everything that is blue, purple, and red, you can see that our color overlay in our image corresponds to that. So it's showing parts of our image that will be affected by our adjustments. Again, the adjustments located in the bottom portion here. Those adjustments, the parts of our images, in this case the houses that are blue, the umbrella which is red, the woman's dress, and also the background which have this tinted purple look to him. And it looks like a good portion of our picture's foreground, these gray areas, are so low in saturation that they're not targeted at all. So that's the way that we can expand our range if we want, but in this case we actually want to be more specific. We don't want to be less specific. So what I really want to do is just target the umbrella. So we're going to pull in these adjustment areas. And I think that actually does a pretty good job. One thing I would note, let's look at her leg here. You can see that a bit of her leg has this red appearance to it, so that when we go and we make a hue adjustment, her leg will actually be changing as well. So we're going to have to do some things later on to work within that structure to basically not have her leg a hue change. We'll touch base on that in a little bit. The last thing I'd like to say is, okay, say we have made our selection. This is the red that we want. I think this is a very good selection of the red. Say if I wanted to adjust the saturation of that red. What I can do is I can actually take this saturation marker that's at the center here and draw that inwards. And as you can see, what it does is it gets rid of less saturated reds. And this is very prevalent in the umbrella, because that umbrella part on the left is a less saturated red than the remainder of the umbrella. So you can see as I draw that outwards, it targets the areas that have a lower saturation. Conversely, if I was to take the edge, what I can do is I can, pull that selection towards the lower saturated parts to get rid of the highly saturated elements. So only targeting the lower areas of saturation. Saturation is a way for these RGB values essentially to allocate their level of saturation. So in terms of light and RGB, what we're looking at here is a selection of this red spectrum on the tree. And what we see here is values of 160 red, 119 green, and 113 blue. These numbers live somewhere in the center of the color values, with the lowest value possible being 0 and the highest possible value being 255. If I take my mouse and I hover over the red in the umbrella, you're going to see that the red number is going to be much, much, much closer to 255, and the green and blue values will be closer to 0. Let's do that just to showcase that. So as you can see, we've massively increased the red values by almost 100. And we've reduced the green values to 0 and the blue values almost to 0 as well. So when we're talking about saturation, what I mean is saturated colors will be closer to 255 and will be further away from 0 in this case. Desaturated colors live in the middle, so they're going to be somewhere between the 50 spectrum to the 150 spectrum. They're probably not going to be in the entered into the area of like 200 plus. That's when we start to see more saturated colors. Completely dark colors have no saturation, so they are represented by 0, 0, and 0. If we hover over a dark part of our image, right here, you can see that those values are much, much closer to 0 than they are 255. So in the case of this sort of shadowy part underneath this bridge here, the values are 26, 25, and 49, illustrating to us that these are very, very desaturated colors, but they're also closer to 0. So when I'm talking about using the saturation slider and I'm drawing it forwards or inwards, I'm just talking about those ranges of colors. So if we're targeting desaturated colors, we're definitely going to be targeting reds that are closer to like those values where they're like 100, 115. And as soon as we start to really pull this into the saturated column, then we're going to be targeting colors that are closer to 200. So that's all you need to know about saturation. In the case of this image, and I would say for most colored parts of your images, you might not need to worry about saturation too much. You're mainly just targeting individual colors. So in this case, we're talking about a hue range. And in this hue range, we have red, and we're going to make an adjustment on that red. And that adjustment is, let's change this umbrella to green instead of red. So we have our selection. What we can do is we could take the hue slider. We're just going to adjust one slider in this case, just for simplicity's sake. And I'm going to turn this all the way over to the green part of our hue, which is to move it further to the right to cool it. And as you can see, our umbrella changes, which is excellent, but you may notice that our foot changes as well, which is an unintended consequence. We also have a little bit of the foreground here and a little bit of this section here in the trees that was sort of an unintended selected part of our image. So these turn green as well. We don't want this, so let's see if we can remove this by basically increasing the targeted section to just the saturated parts. So I can effectively get rid of the foreground and the tree portion just by increasing my saturation mark. As you can see, my image goes back to normal, but the umbrella, which is highly saturated, is still treated with the full hue change. The only area of problem here is the actual foot, which we can get out using a different method. We can adjust this in a bit here. There's one other sort of unintended consequence to this image, and that consequence is that the umbrella itself, by being so bright, actually reflects on her jacket here, and you can see that her jacket is actually closer to a maroon or like burgundy color than it is the natural purple color. And because we have this umbrella here that's bright green, now this sort of looks, it definitely doesn't follow suit with what we would expect to see in that area. So this is sort of something we need to address in terms of a change. So let's just address that part of our image and see what we can come up with. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to introduce a whole nother color wheel in addition to the color wheel hue change on this umbrella here. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're actually going to click this plus button on the left color wheel panel here. And this plus button, what it does is it literally adds an entirely new wheel. When I go to make a new selection, so say I select this color here using the eyedropper, it'll move the wheel, and what you may also notice is that the color wheel icon indicator itself also changes color, which is a kind of handy way of keeping track of which parts of your image are being adjusted. So in the case of our first adjustment, this is the targeting just the umbrella, and now we have that selection here that's targeting just the jacket. Let's see if we can refine this. I'm going to try to slide this further away from the red part of our image here. Actually, it looks like we need that red. Let's see if we need the purple. We might not need as much purple, so I'll probably draw it inwards here. Let's see how much saturation we can get away with. Oh yeah, we can really draw that down, and I think we're going to do a fairly good job of addressing this problem. As you can see, as I pull the saturation inwards, what we're really looking at is just underneath the coat and the umbrella area there. Can you see that that is highlighted? And that, like I said, is the area that we're going for when we go to make an adjustment. Let's change the hue of this as well and see what happens. So as you can see, I'm going to zoom in to illustrate this. I'm going to zoom right on in here. And you can see that that area is actually changed blue by pulling it further into the blue part of the spectrum here. So I'm just going to showcase this. So the natural is that sort of maroon color, and then if I pull it further to the right, we can make it orange. And if I pull the hue further to the left, we can make it blue. Or add, I guess in this case, a purple spectrum. And I would say that that purple is actually quite close to this purple here. What we can do is just visually, I think that those are fairly similar. But you can see here, one of the problems is that we didn't quite capture all of the edge of this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to increase the smoothness. So the smoothness is this panel right here. And what smoothness does is it takes whatever active selection you have in Color Wheel and essentially adds a feather to the edge of it. Those of you that are familiar with the nib tool in edit mode, when you use the brush tool in other modes, will be familiar with feathering. So if I increase the smoothness, watch what may happen in the center there. Well, you can see that at 100%, it does a fairly good job at changing that color without adjusting too much of the green on our umbrella here. Let's see if we can find a home for this that works. I'm going to say about 80. I might lower. I might play around a bit, searching for the correct blue. I think too far over like this and we risk it becoming too green, which we don't want. I think like right in this range is actually perfect. Let's see if I can increase the smoothness without. And let's see if we can maybe expand that outwards and see if it makes any change. I'm just playing around with the settings here to sort of figure out the best range. And I think I actually did have the best range there. Oh yeah, that might be best. Let's zoom out, just have a look. It's still a bit green for my taste. Let's maybe increase the smoothness. And maybe decrease the blue. I think that's sort of what we're looking for hue-wise. That's pretty darn close, I'd say. It's much better than our original, and let's just preview the original, and we can preview this by disabling or hiding that wheel from view. So the wheel in this case is our purple or our maroon wheel. This is before, and this is after. Before and after. One of the problems that arises with this targeted selection is that you'll notice with it on, it actually reduces the warmth or the tint of that of the whole background. Let's just preview it without for a moment. You can see that this is way further into the red spectrum than prior to this being enabled. So when I enable this, it cools off the image considerably. And then another issue we're running into is that we still have this green pop up on that of this woman's leg here. So what we need to do is we need to take our color wheel adjustments, which are really working quite well in this area, right? And this area here. And what we need to do is we need to specify the range. And we can do this in a variety of different ways. There's two color wheels that we're going to apply one adjustment to. And we're going to use either the edit brush, the linear gradient tool, or the radial gradient tool to specify those ranges. Just as a note, I can't have two brush selections for my two wheels. I have to decide on one brush selection or one linear gradient or one radial gradient, all of my color selections that I've made. So with that in mind, with that limitation in mind, the best case course of action for me would actually be to use the radial gradient to make a specified area change to this image. And the reason why is because the area that I'm changing is quite round. It doesn't really require a precise selection. So if we look at this range of our image here, and we go, okay, I'm going to adjust this inwards. I'm going to pull this in, and I'm only going to select this range. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a selection here of this umbrella, and I'm going to make a selection that also contains this adjustment. That we've made on our coat here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert the selection. I think actually we already have an inverted selection, so I'm just going to apply it just inwardly to the umbrella and this woman's coat here. When we take an invert selection, so I'll just show the gradient mask, this gradient mask indicates where what area of our selection here, what area of our gradient is going to have these effects applied. And the effects in this case are everything we see beneath the radial gradient controls. So in this case, the effects being applied are all of the wheels, right? And then all of the actual adjustments to those wheels. So consider this as like 3 different things that are happening. We're basically choosing a part of our image with the radial gradient tool, this guy right here. We're choosing a part of our image that we want to have effects applied. And then the second step down is we're saying, okay, we're going to make 2 color wheel selections to apply to an area on our image. And that's going to be reds in this spectrum and purples in this spectrum. And then after that, we're saying, okay, we have that part of our image selected with this radial gradient. We have the actual colors chosen on the color wheel itself. Let's make the following changes. And then we changed based on those hue criteria that we talked about earlier, and the smoothness specifically to the second color wheel. So now if we invert, what we can do is we can invert our selection. So in essence, we could affect everywhere else in our image, but we don't want to do that. We want to select just the umbrella. So we'll just click the Invert Gradient tool, which is also part of the Linear and the Brush tool. And then we'll just turn off the gradient mask now that we're complete. So the reason why we did this is twofold. We wanted to maintain this pretty tint color that appears in the background. And then we also wanted to get rid of that green color that was affecting this woman's ankle and shin area here. And the reason why is because it was also being changed to a hue of a green when we adjusted this umbrella. And so if we look at Show Previous now, we can see that we effectively used Color Wheel in conjunction with also the Linear Gradient tool to make adjustments on this image that are selective. We've selectively adjust a color within a specific range, visual range on our image. So that sort of covers everything you need to know about the color wheel. It's a tool for making color selections and then applying adjustments to those color selections. They can be further refined by using the brush tool, the linear gradient tool, and the radial gradient tool. What I didn't touch on in this video is you can also combine pixel targeting to make further adjustments that we'll perhaps cover in a future tutorial. The other thing you can do, just as a note, is you can delete your wheels. So in the case you can add new wheels, you can also delete color selections. And then what you can also do is you can invert color wheels themselves. So if I was to invert this color wheel selection right here, what you'll see is this portion will go gray and everywhere else will light up, as you can see by this presentation here. When we invert our selections, obviously our color is going to change here, and that's going to affect our umbrella. And then the other thing you can do is you can just show a mask, and in this case the mask is indicated by black, and will illustrate to you that same mask that appears when you rotate the color wheel itself to select a color. That's just showcasing that overlay over your image to showcase what parts of your image are going to be selected. If I go to my first color wheel, the one that was targeting on the umbrella, you can see the same, I can apply those same inverted principles, or also to select to showcase which parts are highlighted. So that, my friends, is a sort of a full look at the color wheel. And now what I can do is I can apply these changes or click done to move back into the edit suite now that I'm done with color wheel.
As always, thank you for watching this tutorial on the color wheel. If you have any suggestions or there's certain topics that you'd like to see covered in a tutorial video, please just leave a comment in the box below. Give me a shout and just let me know what you want to see. I'd love for your feedback, and I would love to make videos on things that you want to see. So, take care.